Hello, everyone. Today we are doing a program that really has surprised me. Um, there was another program that I did not that long ago about the Cairo Geniza. I had not heard of it a few years ago until I came across the book, and it blew me away because the Cairo Geniza is considered the second most important find after the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in a similar fashion, this synagogue discovery is referred to as the Jewish Pompeii. So, uh, what I have for you today is, we'll have an introduction. There'll be a very interesting video that gives it places the time and the events and the various assaults on the city of Dura Europas and what led to uh, the preservation over like 1800 years to finally yield a remarkable record of Jewish life. It really is amazing. But probably one of the most important thing that really struck me, and I say this personally because I always struggle as to what is the nature of Jewishness, and we forget that we've got Hasidim and Reform, we've got this group and that group. There's so many different people that it's not a monolith. It's all over the place. And that apparently is true in history too. And we have, the stories of the Pharisees and the Essenes, etc. Well, these people were uh, at the crossroads of civilization, and we'll get into the details of that. And why were they there? Well, Levi Strauss got his wagon together and went out west. And he thought he was going to make tents, but he made pants. And in the same way Jews have traveled all over the world, you gotta make a living. So there's the stories of the Jewish peddlers because they couldn't own land, so they sold stuff and they had to travel to different places. Well, this is probably true. They probably traveled with the Roman legions, but it even goes back further because this is a place that got its first start uh, by Alexander the Great, who identified this as a place that could be fortified because it's right on a river. The town is located um, in a very strategic point where you can't access it from the river, and then what's behind it is such open desert that it is very difficult to come from that direction and to launch an assault. Uh, but we'll get on to more of that. Let me look at some of my notes. What's kind of interesting that struck me is uh, the depictions, and we'll detail that. But you have paintings of people who are in togas. They are in all kinds of colorful, you know, arrangements, and it's very much a picture book of biblical stories. Uh, but this is in spite of the prohibition against, the biblical prohibition against making images. And that seems to be discounted. Well, we have, Reformed Jews who think nothing wrong with having a piece of bacon. Or the languages there were multiple, including Aramaic and Greek and Roman, and Latin and, all kinds of Hebrew. Well, our shul operates primarily in English. Hebrew is a little adjunct, and most of our participants really don't know Hebrew. So I think we can liken that. So I'd like to think of this place as being like a city on the Silk Road, that this is at the crossroads of civilizations, a defendable place. Um, at any rate, I think it might be good to start with the the video, and then we'll explain more about the history of it and how it came to be preserved and who has what. And then we'll detail that later with individual paintings. Thank you, Jerry. Jerry's going to be starting the video at 6.
In the isolated windswept desert of eastern Syria, only an hour's drive west of the Iraqi border, is the long-forgotten Hellenistic walled city of Dura Europas. Although the existence of Dura Europas was long known through literary sources, it was only rediscovered in 1920 by British troops. Major archaeological diggings were then carried out in the 1920s and 1930s by French and American teams. The finds were amazingly well preserved, and the site soon became known as the Pompeii of the desert. To understand its archaeological significance, one has to understand its history. Between the years 335 to 323 BC, Alexander the Great conquered what was then considered most of the known world. After his death in 323 BC, his leading generals, eventually known as the successors, jostled for supremacy over parts of his empire for the next 10 years. One of them, Seleucus Nicator, eventually established himself in Babylon in 312 BC, thus founding the Seleucid Empire. As part of a network of military colonies intended to secure Seleucid control of the Middle Euphrates, a new city, Dura Europas, was established on the southern bank of the Euphrates River in 303 BC. Dura's location was ideal because it was both easy to defend and near a major water source. Situated on a slight bend 90 metres above the Euphrates River, with deep valleys on either side of the site, with only the western desert-facing walls exposed to possible attack, made Dura Europas an ideal site for a fortified city. Here the city stood at the intersections of empires for 5 centuries. The Greeks named it Europas after the hometown of its founders, while later, during the Parthian and Roman periods, the locals called it Dura, a Syrian term meaning fortified city. Thus its name, Dura Europas, is a modern archaeological construct. Wow. Situated at the crossroads of multiple trade routes, Dura Europas, eventually encompassing over 180 acres within the city walls, became the home to a confluence of Eastern and Western civilizations and an extremely multicultural population. In the year 113 BC, 187 years after it was established, the city was conquered by the Parthians. This domination lasted for nearly 3 centuries and was only briefly interrupted by a Roman occupation in the year 115 to 117 AD during the Roman Emperor Trajan's expedition to and capture of Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital city located near modern-day Baghdad. By 160 AD, the Parthians' westward movement threatened Rome's borders along the Euphrates, forcing the Roman Emperor Lucius Varus to lead his forces to Syria to push back the enemy. By 165 AD, Varus captured Dura and made it a Roman city, incorporating the stronghold into the Roman defensive system along the eastern frontier of the empire. Nearly 9 decades after coming under Roman control and anticipating an invasion of Roman Syria by the Sasanians, successors to the Parthian Empire, the Roman garrison at Dura Europas massively strengthened the city's defences, intending to hold out at all costs. The Roman emperor of the period, Valerian I, raised an army for the relief of the east. However, with the Vandals, the Franks and the Goths all assaulting Rome's northern borders, he arrived too late to relieve the siege. The Sassanid Persians had become adept at tunnelling under fortifications in order to undermine them and create breaches. As a countermeasure, the Roman garrison decided to sacrifice the street and the buildings along the western wall of the city by filling them in with rubble to bolster the wall's thickness. In doing so, a Christian house church, synagogue, mithraeum, and as many as 12 blocks of the city were intentionally entombed. There is no written record of the siege of Dura Europas. However, archaeologists were able to uncover quite striking evidence of the savagery of the siege, how it progressed, and the final outcome, all from the archaeological remains. In the year 256 AD, 560 years after the founding of the city, the Sassanid king Shapur I laid siege. True to the fears of the defenders, Shapur set his engineers to undermine what archaeologists call Tower 19, 2 towers north of the Palmyrian Gate, which is the main entrance to the city. When the Romans became aware of the threat, they dug a countermine with the aim of meeting the Persian effort and attacking them before they could finish their work. Sassanids managed to fight off the Roman attack. When the city's defenders noticed the flight of their soldiers from the countermine, it was quickly sealed. The countermine, however, was successful, for the Persians abandoned their operations at Tower 19. In 2009, an archaeologist at the University of Leicester claimed to have found evidence that the Persian Empire used poisonous gases at Dura against the Roman defenders during the tunnelling of Tower 19. Excavations had discovered the remains of 19 Roman and 1 Persian soldier at the base of the city walls. It has been suggested that when the Roman countermine breached the Sassanids' mine, bitumen and sulfur crystals were ignited by the Sassanids to create a poisonous gas, which was then funneled through the tunnel with the use of underground chimneys and bellows. The Roman assault party were unconscious in seconds, dead in minutes. The lone Persian soldier discovered among the bodies is believed to be the individual responsible for releasing the gas before the fumes overcame him as well. Next, the Sassanids attacked Tower 14, the southernmost tower along the western wall. This time the mining operation was successful in that it caused the tower and adjacent walls to subside. However, the Roman countermeasures again worked, as the reinforcing of the walls prevented them from collapsing and creating a breach. This brought a third approach to attacking the city. This time a ramp was raised 40 metres long and 10 metres high, attacking the city walls between towers 14 and 15. As it was being built, the Roman garrison fought to stop its progress. The Sassanids started another 2 mines near its base. The mines eventually pierced the inner embankment, and when the ramp was completed, the city's end had come. The sack of the city would have seen the survivors marched off to Ctesiphon and there sold as slaves. The city, once ransacked, was abandoned and never occupied again, eventually being covered by the shifting sands of the desert, ensuring the buildings next to the west wall remained entombed and preserved for archaeologists, who uncovered them almost 1,700 years later. Much is preserved from this last Roman phase of the city's history. Remains include parchment, papyri, and carved inscriptions attesting to the numerous languages spoken and understood in ancient Dura Europas, including Greek, Latin, Palmyrian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Early Arabic, and Middle Persian. The various religions that coexisted in the city speak to an equally complex culture, with temples to Greek, Roman, and Palmyrian gods, as well as dedicated places of worship for Christians and Jews. The excavations open scholars' eyes to the art and architecture of a thriving, multi-ethnic city of perhaps 10,000 people.
Beautiful.
The Roman military culture also contributed to the city's diversity. Troops were recruited from all parts of the empire, which resulted in a multilingual mix from Northern Europe to the Mediterranean and beyond. Through the centuries, one culture after another left its imprint on Dura Europas. Even if Romans issued military orders in Latin and clerks and shopkeepers spoke Aramaic, and many people in the street kept their native tongues, the principal language of government and culture remained the Greek of its founders. Over the last 95 years, archaeologists have uncovered a multitude of buildings dedicated to military, civilian, and religious uses. Significant finds include various temples dedicated to Greek, Roman, and Palmyrian gods and goddesses, Athlad, Zeus, Adonis, Artemis, Jupiter, and Artigatus, a mithraeum, and the Temple of Bel were both uncovered within the Roman fortified camp in the northwest corner of the city. Other discoveries are the Praetorium, baths, an amphitheatre, palace of the commander, the citadel, a huge Greek marketplace known as an agora, and most importantly to modern-day religious studies, a Christian house church and a synagogue. In its time and place, the ancient city of Dura Europas had much in common with today's cosmopolitan urban landscapes. New Yorkers would have felt right at home in the grid pattern of streets, where merchants lived, scribes wrote, and Jews worshipped in the same block not far from a Christian church. The Jewish synagogue, located by the western wall between towers 18 and 19, is dated by an Aramaic inscription to 244 AD and is a remarkable creation of the Hellenistic period. It is the best preserved of many ancient synagogues of that era. When uncovered in 1932, it was found that it contains a forecourt and house of assembly with frescoed walls depicting people and animals, and a Torah shrine in the western wall facing Jerusalem. The synagogue's paintings are the earliest continuous surviving biblical narrative cycle ever discovered. Also uncovered is the earliest Christian house church ever identified. Located by Tower 17, it was preserved by the same defensive infill that saved the synagogue. This church occupied a typical upper-class two-storey Roman house centred around a columned courtyard. Though not as famous and is smaller and less extensively decorated with wall paintings than the nearby synagogue, there are many other similarities between the two buildings. Scholars speculate that the congregation gathered around the pool, which was used for baptism, and in the atrium sat the bishop, who celebrated Eucharist at the table. The surviving frescoes of the baptistry room show the Good Shepherd, the healing of the paralytic, and Christ and Peter walking on the water. These are the earliest paintings of Jesus Christ ever found and date back to 235 AD. There were also frescoes of Adam and Eve as well as David and Goliath. Since Christian worship was still prohibited and subject to persecution in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, it was necessary for Christian places of worship to be discreet, if not completely secret. Thus, the converted house churches of this era, as at Dura Europas, show no exterior change. Also partially preserved by the defensive embankment was a shrine to the god Mithra, a deity believed to be popular among both Roman and Persian soldiers of the time. The Mithraeum, located between towers 23 and 24, was built in a place that, in 165 AD, became the Roman army's encampment. The earliest archaeological traces found within the temple are from between 168 and 171 AD, which coincides with the arrival of Emperor Lucius Varius and his troops. An inscription stone from 210 AD mentions the Roman Emperor Septimus Severus. In 256 AD, with the war with the Sicilians looming, the sanctuary, as well as all the other buildings and streets along the western wall, were filled in and became part of the strengthened fortifications. Other finds include arms and armour belonging to the Roman garrison at the time of the final Sicilian siege in 256 AD. These include painted wooden shields, the only example of an intact Roman legionary shield ever discovered, and complete horse armour, incredibly well preserved after 1,700 years by the very finality of the destruction of the city in its final hours. Cities such as Alexandria, Antioch, Damascus, Jerusalem and Palmyra may be the shining lights of Eastern antiquity, but Dura Europas demands much attention. Its vast array of religious buildings, paintings, sculptures, its enduring cultural complexity, its remarkable representation of daily life in a medium-sized town in the ancient world, and not least, the dramatic remains of the fortifications and siege works, combined with the precipitous views over the green valley of the Euphrates, all make for a striking experience.
Excellent.
Thank you, Jerry. Well, I'm just blown away at the whole idea. Let me turn on my light here. Yeah, yeah. I'm just blown away by the whole idea that such a successful multicultural place would be destroyed. I mean, it says something to me that is very disturbing about the nature of human desire to conquer and have everything be exactly as they see it. In fact, one of the things that I just did yesterday in just preparing for this, I said, well, where is this now? Well, ISIS destroyed it in 2013. However, going back to the 1930s, the excavation that was led by Yale University, and it was the French Academy of it's called Inscriptions and Letters, spent several seasons, digging it out, and they did two things. One is the actual part that were removed now resides in Syria, in Damascus, in their National Museum. But before doing so, Yale University sent one of their recent art school graduates to go make a copy. And I think it was done like 3/4 scale. And everything that was there was there was a painting done to copy it exactly, and that was brought back to Yale. So we have records, even though the site is now recently destroyed. I mean, it is located halfway between Palmyra and Babylon. So we know about Babylon, or rather Palmyra being destroyed by ISIS, and it didn't register on me that it included this site too. It's just a tragedy. Anyway, let me just look at my notes here. Well, maybe it'd be best for me to describe some of the details in doing a PowerPoint. Let's start that now.
Abraham, can I ask
Yes,
a question?
sure.
When you say that ISIS destroyed it, so that what we saw in the video of the ruins, that was destroyed?
Well, that's not, I think whatever was left after because the excavations had been done, whatever was left was probably further destroyed. I mean, the good thing is that when they got there, I mean, the paintings had already been removed. So that also precludes any, further, investigation, I guess. I don't know. It's
So if you went there now, you wouldn't see the remains of the walls?
I don't know. I don't
Okay.
know. I wish I could answer that question.
All right.
You should look it up.
Okay, so I had in this, okay. Now, I'm starting with this slide here because I thought, to me, just as I was surprised, I was poking around the internet, and I see that this was in Somalia, or was it Ethiopia? I forget. But here are very different kinds of pyramids, and this is recent photographic records. Do you know about this? I certainly don't. But look at these structures. I mean, has anybody investigated who and what and where? Maybe in some university setting, there are a few scholars here and there that can tell you about it. But to be able to see this is stunning. I mean, these tiny little, very pointy little pyramids that apparently it is carried down the Nile further. I mean, where else can you find things like this? It's just kind of stunning. Next slide. So here's one of the pictures you saw in that, and I don't know what whether this is current, whether that's still standing, I don't know. But it certainly shows you the construction and the gates, etc. Next. Okay, and that too you saw on the video, which explains why it was chosen, the steep embankments, but a source of water. I mean, all those things are part of what makes something strategic. Next. Another interesting detail. I mean, pretty sophisticated, stonework. I don't know where this is in the complex of things, but we'll go on. Next. Nice detail. It's amazing just to see that has survived, a couple of thousand years to see this entryway. But I thought it was kind of a curious detail that I came across. Next. Another view, the steep embankments, and that's a kind of a curious little opening. I don't know whether it's a doorway or a window, but it gives you a sense of the place. Next. Yeah, another entryway, I guess. Next. And this I thought was kind of funny. We talked about making a living. So apparently some locals have set up a little way to make a living, and some tickets, maybe some little tour guides, etc. But you find that wherever you go in the world, that if it looks interesting, somebody's going to make a business out of it. Next. Okay. Now, what I learned about this was really kind of interesting, in that this was really a substantial complex. Where there was an entryway, there was the synagogue. I learned that there was a large residence, and I don't know whether that means for the leadership. They have rabbis. I don't know, but they also had a guest facility for traveling Jews. So I mean, if you go to another city and you show up at some synagogue, somebody can invite you for a Shabbat dinner. So they did that in those days. It was really kind of interesting. Probably we talked about Jewish peddlers. People. Merchants would travel. They always traveled. They always went places with their wares, and so that where's a good place to stop if you're a Jew? At the synagogue, of course. But I thought that was fascinating. So it is highly developed. We talked a little bit earlier about their arrival, but even though it was suggested in what I read that the Jews probably arrived with the Roman garrisons. That city was there long before, and in fact, the Greek was still part of the official language, and more than likely, Jews also traveled with the Greeks. So I don't know what the answers are for that. Next slide. Okay, this is a sketch of the interior, and we'll look at that in photographs shortly. But as you might expect, when you're looking at the Western Wall faces Jerusalem as is required. The walls are painted with a faux marble look. There is in the lowest area, straight ahead, what you see with the little arch is the Torah ark. And below that, there are a number of little illustrations. Apparently, there was a children's wall where there are several depictions of the stages of a child's growth. Which is kind of really very telling about making the observations, or maybe, teaching and understanding. Maybe it had to do with teaching children. Maybe they had their own shul school. I mean, that's always part of any society, that you teach the next generation. The images involved, personifications, primarily the biblical stories, because those who came there, they would come to listen, to learn, but also to feast their eyes, despite the prohibition of images. What was contained was astrological symbols, animals, flowers, fruit, grains, and then a term that I just looked up myself and learned, called the apopropaic designs, to ward off evil. What is that? Well, there's the Hapsa, there's the mezuzah. They're all, I mean, every society has these things to guard against, you know, the evil eye or the evil forces, and they had it too. Um, it was also a time where the Jews were not persecuted. They were an integral part of the society. They were fully supported, you know, by the Romans, and at a time when the Christians were persecuted. So what we learned in the video was their house was unmarked. They were small and it was modest, and that while they had designs, you know, weren't as extravagant and as lavish as this. And this raises an interesting point to my thinking, that who learned from who about doing frescoes and friezes? I mean, is it possible that this got transferred to the Christians and they said, let's do it like the Jews? I don't know. And then the Jews said, no, it's prohibited. Let's stop this nonsense. Who knows? But it's an interesting concept as to what came first. Next image. And there's the main view, and I don't know what I think this may be the reproduction, and it's an interesting kind of Torah arc. You could see where the columns have this painted fall marble. It looks almost like a scalloped seashell as a kind of in the top of the Torah arc area, and. Let's see. We already talked about the children's section, which is, you know, on the lowest level that you could see. Next section. I didn't research this. I can't tell you about the Battle of Ebenezer, but that's what it was titled. But I mean, it just is an interesting, really beautiful depiction of form and color about whatever that event was. And, you know, I just hadn't gone that far to really uncover that, but I thought visually it was stunning. Next, please. This one is, you know, I have a lot more to say about it. It's really three parts. You know, to the right, I read where there are three figures. The center one, the seated one, it is probably Pharaoh speaking, giving his edict to kill the firstborn. Next to him on his left is a scribe. On his left, like it is a scribe. The other person is apparently a courtier. The center section, you see where the Moses' mother puts Moses into the river, and then to the left you see where Pharaoh's daughter finds the baby, and she's with maidens, and in fact, it looks like the two women above her, at least the one in the kind of orange in the center, look like she might be holding the baby, so that you've got several stages along the way, and maybe that's Moses' real mother. So you could see it's a pictorial, even though Jews have always been literate. I mean, that's really remarkable about them. They were using pictures to illustrate the graphic novel of the day. Next. This is an interesting depiction. And this is the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. And you could see there's a kind of sense of chaos and tightness. And you see like the little fish right below where the soldiers are with their armor, with their shields and spears, and the chaos of the Israelites on the right side. And there is Moses, who is a giant. I mean, he is like a superhero. He's very large, and here size says importance. And what was also kind of, and I don't know why he's depicted twice. In one I'm not sure what that is, but it also leads to another discussion that I read where the story is really the story of the Haggadah. And in our Haggadah, we always hear about the importance of the acts of God, that God splits the sea, all these steps are all acts of God. And Moses in the Haggadah is scarcely mentioned, which is kind of interesting. I didn't realize that. Whereas here in this pictorial presentation, Moses is the man. I mean, he's the guy who does that. I mean, there's no mention of God, which is a whole different way to see things. Next, please. I don't have any particular comments other than you could see, the menorahs, and you can see Aaron. It looks like Aaron is in the upper right. I don't know the significance of the 3 doorways below, but it is just absolutely beautiful. I mean, just how that's done. And there's much more. I mean, if you want to get into it, you can, really dig in. But that I show these examples. Next. Encampment and miraculous well. I read some about this, but I didn't really quite understand it. But you could see tents surrounding, and I don't know what the well is, and I don't know what it almost looks like serpents. Does anybody know? I don't. I mean, I just didn't uncover that, but there's a menorah there, the candles, all kinds of things, but it is worthy of a story, and it's there somewhere. I don't have it, but I'm sure it's got to be there. Next.
Fascinating.
Elijah and widow of Zarephath. And I believe there was a story about Elijah restoring a dead child. I'm not sure. I have a faint memory of that, but that too. I mean, it looks very Greek with the reclining couch and with the robes. I mean, these are people all wearing togas. I mean, isn't that interesting? And look at the decoration, that the borders, the filigree. It's beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Abraham has an arm coming down.
Yes. I'm glad you noticed that, because there's another one that we'll see, and that's got to be the hand of God.
Yeah, and there's one way up here too.
Okay, all right.
2 of them there.
Okay, well, there's another one that in slide. It might be the next one that will hand of God reaching down. I thought there looks like there are 3 hands there, so I don't know if these are all different occasions. But I want to remind you that Michelangelo painted the same thing. Maybe he's a copycat, but this whole image of God, reaching out and touching mankind's hand, passing on the power, or reaching for sustenance and help and the desire to thrive. But there's a pathos in this, that it's a 2-way street, reaching for and then giving. It's very powerful. David anointed by King Saul, and I don't know whether yes, I think that's in Saul 1, and you can see David again is larger than life, and he picks out who the next king's going to be, which is really kind of interesting. But I don't know who all the others are. I guess the runner-ups. But it's so beautiful. Look at I'd love to see these paintings. Next, and the Hebrews leaving Egypt. Now, I just pulled this out because it's it's so interesting looking, but I don't have anything that that I can really discern here. I mean, it looks like soldiers in the center, and I don't know what the doorway is. And the last figure I saw in the yellow robe was Moses, but I don't know if that's Moses. Maybe it is. I don't know. But that painting was titled Hebrews Leaving Egypt. In fact, there are actually no titles at all, but the scholars, doing the interpretation assigned a name and or a definition for what was happening. Next. Witnessing a miracle. Which miracle? I don't know, but it's beautiful. Are they? Yes. Okay. And here's Elijah challenging the 450 prophets of Baal.
This was a snake.
Yeah, it looks like a snake at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And who is the character in the center? And I can't quite tell what's happening on the top of that center pillar. Is that a creature of some sort on the top? I don't know. And
It's like a mother and child. Look here.
yeah, okay. And what do I see being carried by all of those folks in the white and the pink? It almost looks like where a sword might be, but I hope not, but maybe it is. Anyway, and that's an interesting story about the ark. We have images described about the ark. The movie Raiders of the Ark. They actually pieced together from the description, but I think it's in Saul too that the ark was carried into battle with the Philistines, and the Philistines captured it and took off with it, and when it was never seen again, except for the movies. But but here it is depicted, the famous ark, and that's the end of my PowerPoint. But let's ask some questions. I thought it was really fascinating that we were fortunate enough to have preserved it, or at least to have a copy of it. And to me, it illustrates diversity where we don't necessarily see diversity. Now, I find myself looking at the diversity here and going back to our own group and what Mordecai Kaplan said of Judaism as being an evolving culture. You talk to a Hasid and it's all ritual and religion. You talk to an Israeli and it's all about nationhood and state and armies. You talk to an American, you get a different point of view versus people from other places. And what strikes home to me is that there is this full diversity of who Jews are. And this is a wonderful illustration from so long ago of how complex that can be.
So Abraham, all of those murals that you just showed, those have all been destroyed now?
No, they are in Damascus.
Okay, so the murals, the pieces of wall were actually picked up and taken
Yes.
away? Yes,
I had found in one of my searches, and I went past it and didn't photograph it, of an old black and white photograph where it actually showed the wall being removed and hoisted, for shipping. But it was, from what I've read, that the museum in Damascus, Syria, has those. Now, whether they're safe, they'll be there. At least there's a copy at GL. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I should have asked you earlier. Why, when it was abandoned, when the Romans left and it was under siege and then it was abandoned, why didn't any other civilization come in and use it? What happened to the homeless? Didn't they You know, I would think
well,
someone would come in and squatters or someone would,
well,
you
if
know?
the place was so decimated, I mean, first of all, anybody who was there was sold off as a slave. So
Yeah.
there were no people there. And if the place was so destroyed with fire and rubble, I mean, if they filled it, you know, I don't know. I mean, it seems as though if it works, it has to work with support. You need a garrison to protect it. You need people who are craftsmen and merchants, and you know, people to get the water and people to provide food, and you know, so it would have to start all over again because apparently it was so destroyed. It was rubble, I guess.
And Miriam, what I picked up in 2011, ISIS destroyed everything from what, but I didn't go any further, but that's what, as far as I got.
Anybody else?
See,
Why? How did you find out about this?
In my poking through, trying to find subjects for, you know, for Bagel U, you know, that I came across this name. I said, well, what is that? And in fact, I had asked Rabbi Diana about that before I found a lot of stuff. I said, do you know about this? She said, well, we had it mentioned in one class.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And if that happened at a rabbinical school, which is, I mean, you know, it blew me away.
Well, good for you for bringing it to
Yeah,
us because, I
exactly.
mean, it's a whole city.
Yes. A cosmopolitan city, a city that the world should envy
Right.
and copy, you know, where all these different religious groups interacted and thrived together.
In a way, it's like Jerusalem with Christians and Jews and Arabs living together.
Yes. And yet the Iranians would be, as soon as they get their bomb, you know, they're going to send it.
Yep. We know.
So it'll be that story all over again. I mean, it's crazy. Antoinette, do you have any questions?
yeah, that was very
Yeah.
good, Abraham.
What's that?
It was very
Thank
good.
you for bringing it to us.
Yeah, yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that this is recorded because I know it's summertime, and I wish that there were more people would avail themselves of this interesting topic, and hopefully, you know, we'll you know, promote its presence, you know, as a recording, you know, on our website. And in fact, you know, if anybody, you know, if you tell people about it, well, you can learn about it by tapping into our website. Yeah. Yes.
Good.
Good.
Wonderful.
So
Thanks so
I
much.
guess that's
thank
it.
you.
All right. Very good.
Bye to everybody.
Abraham.
Take care.
That was great, honey, great.